There's something rotten in the state of autism TikTok. Rotten to the core. Let's talk about Aspie supremacy.
Not autistic, you're probably just a starseed. People that are higher vibrational souls, people that are conscious beings, not NPCs, not organic portals, that actually have souls and personalities.
You have good genes, you know that, right? You have good genes.
Aspie supremacy isn't new. Not by a long shot. When we first got the internet, autistic people were thrilled. Couldn't be happier, let me tell you. You know, when young people now look back on the early internet to try and get a taste for what society and culture was like back then, what they're actually getting is a peek into the lives of the geeky neurodivergent kids. The cool kids weren't online till Facebook. They were outside with friends. The early internet seemed weird and inaccessible to most people, and that was because it was weird and inaccessible to most people. Computers and internet connections were expensive, and the whole time you had people on the telly going on about how it's all just a fad and won't catch on anyway. You had to really be able to see the potential in it. And geeky, neurodivergent people who faced barrier after barrier in the outside world immediately did. They saw the opportunity of freedom that it offered and they jumped at it. Autistic people shaped and literally built so much of the internet that we still know today. There was no such thing as an autistic community before the internet, but forums, message boards, and chat rooms would be the foundation of what would become a thriving and increasingly organised community. I was too young to be on forums back then, and I didn't even know I was autistic, so I wouldn't have found them anyway. I spent my online time getting hit on by people on MSN Messenger. I couldn't find an actual historical record of the first use of the term Aspie supremacy, but I did find a post by somebody who says that they think they might have invented the term autistic supremacy in 1999 in response to Aspie supremacy discourse. So I think it's safe to say that it was a thing by then. The concept gained in popularity and became a frequent topic on autism forums by the mid-2000s. But then, what is the difference between Aspie supremacy and autistic supremacy? So Aspie supremacy originally referred to the idea that people who were diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, that they were different from and better than people who had been diagnosed as autistic. This was before the diagnostic criteria changed. See, we now diagnose people with autism spectrum disorder, and then this is further classified by care needs. All diagnosed autistic people have care needs because you don't get diagnosed unless you do. The diagnostic criteria were changed because there is no hard line to be drawn between different autistic people. People with ASD1 are autistic and people with ASD3 are autistic. The only line that we can draw is how much support an individual needs. And individual needs fluctuate over the course of a person's lifetime, so even that line needs to be flexible. The distinction between Asperger's and autism was flawed right from the very beginning.
The distinction came about thanks to Hans Asperger, an Austrian paediatrician who was an enthusiastic participant of the child euthanasia program of Nazi Germany. There has been some debate as to Asperger's involvement in the program. But over the years, we have unearthed his own writings and correspondence that show that he was a proud and vocal supporter of eugenics. It's also been discovered that often Asperger was far more severe than his own colleagues when it came to his judgment of the disabled children in his care. And those children who he deemed too disabled were sent to die at the infamous Am-Spiegelgrund Clinic in Vienna. It's clear from Asperger's own words that he saw it as his duty to classify children for the betterment of the human race.
Different types of child were worthy of different types of life. He noted, however, that some people who would have fallen under his category of autistic psychopathy went on to do important work in academia and the arts, and so he created the distinction of Asperger's syndrome.
Some paint this move as a brave paediatrician who found a way to save some of the children in his care. But it's now clear that this was no display of compassion, but a furthering of the idea that all people can be categorized onto a hierarchy, with those at the bottom simply unworthy of life.
In the early 20th century, there were a great number of Jewish academics and scientists seen as leaders of their fields. When the Nazis rose to power, those who could fled the country. This created a gap in the scientific abilities of the Nazi regime, exacerbated by the fact that they dismissed all the achievements of Jewish physicists, including and especially Einstein, as Jewish science. By the 40s, the regime was in desperate need of so-called Deutsche scientists. They were losing a war. The threat of nuclear arms was looming, and there was a scramble to keep up with the advances of so-called Jewish science. You know, aka actual science.
The idea that there is a special kind of person who has a condition which might make them especially good at science, especially apt at doing some of the things that a government at war might need to get done, code breaking, computation, statistical analysis, physics, people who were already institutionalized and therefore practically captive. I can only imagine this came as good news to the regime. Asperger designated autistic people into those who could be exploited and those who could not. There is no pride to be found in that distinction.
So if Aspie supremacy is all to do with the distinction between autism and Asperger's syndrome, then what is autistic supremacy? Well, according to the person who thinks they might have invented the term,
I was referring to autistic people who went beyond just thinking we were just as valuable as anyone, and went into the mode of thinking they were superior. When I say superior, I don't mean being better at specific skills, which on average we are in some areas, but better people, more valuable as a whole. Some went even further than mere superiority and said the most insulting and terrible things about non-autistic people, not as satire, but for real. And some went even further than that and wanted non-autistic people either dead or evolved out of existence.
and that is what I want to talk about. Most of the time these days, autism supremacy and Aspie supremacy are used somewhat interchangeably, and also these days it can take many different forms. From the fetishization of giftedness, and those of you who have your IQs in your bio, to the idea that autism is the next step in human evolution, to even wackier ideas like, what if we were aliens? Beings made of pure spirit sent down from the heavens to better humanity. Join me as I do my very best to highlight these different forms of autistic supremacy and uncover the dark history behind them. This video was months in the making, the best part of a year, and I have no idea if YouTube is going to push this topic or not. There's a lot of darkness ahead. I am struggling at the minute to keep this channel afloat, and so I would greatly appreciate your engagement and, if possible, your patronage.
If you are autistic, you are an energy worker, okay? I'm gonna break it to you now. You are one.
You're not autistic, you're probably just a starseed. You're not autistic. Stop diagnosing yourself with autism. You're probably just a starseed.
I've seen a huge link between neurodivergency and starseeds, or rather souls that are not from Earth, that have had a history in the cosmos somewhere.
If you are autistic, you chose to enter this life with more of your soul embodied.
From the information that I've gathered, I believe that the kids who are on the autism spectrum are actually rainbows and sometimes crystal children. But regardless of whatever wave they're in, they are absolutely higher dimensional souls. They come into this world with very special and very specific gifts, talents, abilities. These are not only a gift for them, a gift for humanity.
Rainbow children are the gift for the new Earth. They are the ones who set the stage. Their genetics are even different. Take the characteristics of both the indigo and the crystal. That's what the rainbow child is made out of. They are the most naturally connected to the spiritual realm. They're extremely advanced souls.
If you are autistic, you have spiritual gifts. You are spiritually advanced. That is why you appear to be autistic. Your nervous system is heightened due to what kind of soul you are and what you're here to do.
Autistic people are the most natural, purified form of humanity, and neurotypical people are an offshoot of capitalism and colonialism.
So when it comes to being nonverbal or not speaking as an autistic trait, when you exist at a higher frequency, you vibrate faster. And that can mean that you exist slightly in the future.
We are like the X-Men, okay? And the powers that be have wanted to categorize these people as crazy, disabled, ADD, whatever, just so they could medicate you to suppress your gifts. You're not autistic. You're a higher vibrational soul incarnated into this body. It's like you are an individuated aspect of source, a fractal of some type of higher consciousness. Sometimes these people are actually archangels incarnated. You are a superhero. You are not disabled. You are hyper advantaged, and they want to make these people believe that there's something wrong with them when they're really the best of them. And you usually probably have a higher IQ than the rest of them.
Come, sit. Can I interest you in some mystical novelties? I could read your tarot if you like, or photograph your aura. No? Cold read? Spiritual medium services? I've got crystals. I made a video years ago about indigo children and autism. I loved that video, I think in part because it was so personal. It starts off with an interview with an indigo child where I completely honestly give accounts of multiple times that I seem to exhibit psychic powers. Honestly, I think I make as good a case as any of the starseed indigo children that I've seen online, and without lying. My own mother used to think that I was psychic in some way. I'm not, because no one is. Indigo children, rainbow and crystal children, starseeds, Pleiadians.
So I've been saying for years that I think I'm a starseed, more like knowing I am, and that I originally came from the star Electra in the Pleiadian system. Most people think I'm crazy. Well, I also found out recently that I'm autistic, and apparently there is a whole book about autism and Pleiadians. I have yet to read it, and unfortunately can't find it anywhere available online.
Some of the children that you, the humans, call autistic are in fact Pleiadians who have come to Earth of their own free will for the purpose of helping the planet in its transition to its
next stage of evolution.
We developed the autistic mechanism to enable our Pleiadian essence to arrive and settle on Earth in human bodies without losing our Pleiadian consciousness.
The idea is that those who would normally be diagnosed with some kind of neurodivergency, that in fact they are actually a different kind of person with a different kind of soul sent from the stars to help humanity towards a brighter future. Sometimes they're talked of as if they're literal aliens. Other times it's talked of as if it's a mutation that happens every few decades or so. Sometimes it's more about what kind of soul you have. And other times, they're spoken of like gods.
Pleiadians are gods, they're not aliens. So the Pleiadians came during this first world and they worked with the Hopi gods. You know, like the people learned songs and they stood up and they started to dance, and there was an evolutionary process of the Hopi people.
Did something dramatic happen During the Third
The
World?
Third World ended when the comets hit the Earth.
I've spoken a lot about the origins of various New Age beliefs in the past because it's kind of a special interest of mine. Because I used to love all of that. As a kid, I would eat up anything to do with the paranormal. Anything. All I wanted for my birthdays and Christmases at one point was books on the paranormal. I did a school project when I was like 9 or 10 about the paranormal. Oh, from ghosts to crop circles to the Bermuda Triangle, anything. Later, I got more into like witchcraft and learning about old European religious practices and mythologies. And later still, in my 20s, I rather regrettably became immersed in backpacking hippie culture in Southeast Asia. It was during that time that I became introduced to the idea that there is ancient knowledge about very important things, which has either been forgotten or actively hidden from us. I met my first conspiracy theories. I got a copy of Zeitgeist, the movie, on a USB stick from some guy in a hostel in Malaysia, and I watched it in my room on my ancient second-hand laptop. And then when I did move somewhere with a TV, we didn't get many English-speaking channels, but we did get the History Channel. So, esotericism, a category encompassing a diverse range of religious traditions that are typically included together because of their shared cultural marginality or their focus on imparting teachings to a select group. The concept emerged largely in the 19th century Western Europe as a means of categorizing various traditions with a much longer history in European society, including Hermetism, Kabbalah, ceremonial magic, alchemy, and astrology. Rosicrucianism? Anyway, although it has since also come to encompass more modern traditions, such as spiritualism, theosophy, Wicca, and the New Age milieu. Confusingly, there is no universally agreed definition of esotericism. But the thing it all kind of loosely shares in common is this idea of secret knowledge, which currently only a few people have access to. But you could also have access to it. If you follow me, or if you read that book, or if you listen to that guru, or attend my course, you listen to my podcast, pay for my services, join my group.
Now, esoteric and New Age ideas are very broad and they vary depending on who you're talking to at the time. But there are some underlying themes which are hard to ignore. I've spoken before about the Christian roots of the law of attraction and how it's basically just prayer reworked.
How it was popularised by the elite because it, on one hand, bolstered the idea that they deserve to be where they are, and on the other, put the onus on individuals to better their lives through the power of manifestation.
Basically, you are where you are because you deserve it, because you've chosen to be there. A lot of New Age thought has its roots in Christian reconceptions. It has its roots in the work of Franz Mesmer, an early German physicist who proposed an energy transference between living things. And New Thought, a religious movement which rose in the USA in the early 19th century. From Wikipedia.
The New Thought movement was based on the teachings of Phineas Quimby, an American mesmerist and healer. Quimby had developed a belief system that included the tenet that illness originated in the mind as a consequence of erroneous beliefs, and that a mind open to God's wisdom could overcome any illness.
And then you've got people like Guido von List, Jörg Lanz, and Helena Lodi Blavatsky.
Pleiadians have been involved in Earth's ancient civilizations, assisting with the development of human culture and spirituality. Pleiadians are humanoid in appearance, resembling humans in many ways. They're often much taller, fair-skinned, with light-colored eyes. I've come to see them as the elven race of the cosmos.
The links between the Nazis and occult mysticism can't be understated, although they can very well be overstated, the History Channel. It's not really known to what extent Hitler himself believed in this stuff, but my money is on definitely a bit. But what is known is that others in those halls of Nazi power, such as Heinrich Himmler, leader of the SS and main architect of the Holocaust, definitely did. And Hitler absolutely leaned into exploiting the popularity of this stuff among the German population, but especially among the German upper classes.
It is well known that Hitler criticized occultists, Freemasons, and astrologers, and even persecuted some of them when he came into power. And yet, in his nightly monologues to his assembled guests, Hitler revealed his belief in the very ideas that these groups were perpetrating. Ample evidence of this is provided in his references to reincarnation, the lost continent of Atlantis, and Hans Horbiger's world ice theory, as well as in his conviction that the early myths and legends of cosmic disasters and struggles between giants and gods are actually mankind's vague memory of a disaster that destroyed a humanity.
Occultism, mysticism, and esotericism were enthralling Europe's upper classes long before Hitler was born. A fascination with the East, especially Tibet, captured the imaginations of those Europeans who were afraid of losing their privilege and power due to the encroachment of democracy and industrialization. So many of our concepts, ideas, and structures have their origins in just rich Europeans being afraid of democracy. Change my mind. Orientalist tales of the Far East were full of talk of gurus with ancient knowledge and a promise of a return to a more ordered time, a more natural time, a way to get back to our essential human nature, which, of course, included a natural hierarchy of all things. At the same time, you had upper and middle class people abandoning the cities, which were once nice and classy places full of statues and culture and art and things like that, but which were now full of factories and chimneys and workhouses, and of course all the working poor that goes along with it. And so they began fleeing to the countryside. A very cottagecore-esque movement flourished among Europeans' elite. In Germany and Austria, this longing for a return to a rural Volkish life became known as Lebensreform. So there's a lot going on in Europe around this time. It's kind of hard to weave it into a narrative, so just all of this is happening from the mid-1800s to the end of World War II in 1945. Hitler was born in 1889, just so you have a time frame. So you've got the Industrial Revolution making the rich folk scared, making them reconsider city life. You've got science flourishing, the theory of evolution proving some Bible stuff wrong, leading to wealthy Christians to go searching for answers to the contradictions, to reconsider how religion is viewed. It's a time when just normal rich people could go travelling for the first time, just for travel's sake. They didn't have to be a merchant or a colonizer or something first. More people are able to write and print books. Mass media that wasn't just the church was a thing for the first time. It's a lot. There's a lot happening. Revolutions even. And in Germany and Austria specifically, there began a movement for German nationalism before World War I, which had its roots firmly in the mystic, occult teachings of people like Helena Blavatsky, Guido von List, and Jörg Lanz. Helena Blavatsky was a Russian aristocrat who went backpacking in Tibet and then became one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. But in a bad way. She's known as the founder of Theosophy and was obsessed with Plato and ancient Hindu and Buddhist ideas. From Wikipedia, as presented by Blavatsky, Theosophy teaches that there is an ancient and secretive brotherhood of spiritual adepts known as the Masters, who, although found around the world, are centered in Tibet. These masters are alleged by Blavatsky to have cultivated great wisdom and supernatural powers. They believe that these masters are attempting to revive knowledge of an ancient religion once found around the world, and which will again come to eclipse the existing world religions. In her book, The Secret Doctrine, The Secret Doctrine, Helena Blavatsky lays out her ideas about evolution. She believed that there are 7 root races, the first of which were created purely from spirit. The second were the Hyperboreans, who came from the North Pole, and who were also made purely from spirit. Then there came the third, who lived on the lost continent of Lemuria, which is a mythical lost continent which was proposed to link Africa, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent, so called because lemurs, apparently. Anyway, plate tectonics debunked that idea pretty swiftly, but it still pops up on the History Channel from time to time. And so then, according to Blavatsky, in the 4th round of Earth, higher beings came down to Earth, and that's when people actually became people. And those people, the 4th root race, lived on the continent of Atlantis, and the Atlanteans gave way to the 5th root race, the Aryan race. Blavatsky would publish work in which she upholds the Aryan race as the hope for humanity. The swastika was already an extremely popular symbol throughout Europe and the world, really. It was everywhere, and it always symbolised good things, change, new beginnings. The Theosophy Society used it a lot, but so did lots of other kinds of society. But Blavatsky decided that the swastika was one of the most powerful symbols going, and that it should be the symbol of the 5th root race, the Aryan race. Blavatsky didn't actually encourage domination of races over other races, but she certainly paved the way for those who would. Guido von List, born Guido Karl Anton List in 1848, was an Austrian occultist and writer who supported an anti-Christian return to the old gods, particularly Wotan, commonly known as Odin. That's just Jeremy Corbyn. In 1902, he became under the influence of Blavatsky's Theosophy, and he incorporated it into his own beliefs. His ideas became incredibly popular among German-speaking elites, and the List Society was formed in 1908. List believed that modern society was degenerate, but that all the muck would be cleansed away by some kind of apocalyptic event. OG preppers. So List got into all that theosophy stuff during a time when he was temporarily blind, and also during that time he claimed to have visions of ancient runes. These runes, what he just made up, became a huge hit, although we do now brightly call them pseudo-runes. Anyway, Himmler adopted these runes for SS symbolism, uniforms and flags. And until 1939, when World War II broke out and they had more pressing concerns, some branches of the SS were trained in ancient runic symbolism. You know what the SS were, right? They started off as Hitler's bodyguards, elite troops there to protect the leaders of this new Nazi movement, but under the direction of Himmler, they would become the starting block for the next stage of human evolution. Sound familiar? People sometimes think that Nazis thought that they were the Aryan super race, but that's not true. They believed that the Aryan super race had effectively been wiped out due to interbreeding, that it was a people who did exist but don't anymore, but that their genes still exist and that they could be bred back into existence. See, true Aryans, the OG Aryans, they weren't just blonde-haired, blue-eyed, able-bodied and fertile. They were psychic. Psychic. Again, we don't know how much Hitler himself believed in all of this, but there is evidence that several very influential Nazi figures fully believed that they were descendants from higher beings with psychic powers. some of whom even claimed to have a psychic connection with the spirit of the Aryan race.
How do I connect with the Pleiadians? This is an excellent question. I'll try to go as deep as I can and give you some tangible tools. The first thing to recognize is that the Pleiadians are beings of light that operate on a frequency of love and harmony from a 0-point perspective.
With me as I channel the Pleiades and see how this resonates. As we zoom into the Pleiades, the planet is full with pastel colors, blue and pink, and the vibration is very high, almost like children singing or dolphin making noises.
Greetings, chosen ones. I am coming on with a message from the Pleiadian Collective to discuss with you your soul contract prior to coming to Earth in relation to your family.
She's saying even the reptilians are evolutionary souls, and we see many of them incarnating now on Earth and other places. But one of their main roles for them to play here in the universe was contrast. And she's talking about how Earth is somewhat of a metaphor of what has happened in the galaxy and in this universe at times, where the dark forces are going up against the lighter forces and creating this kind of contrast, going up against each other.
This is the Pleiadian Shuikia Manoy Soyakuyatai. The Pleiadian Shiatai Sia love and connection. They're telling me Siatai, 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 Shiato Kopai, Siamanai, Shiai, Sia. They're saying thank you very much for reaching out and to channeling this loving vibration to you all as the collective, which is so beautiful. We love, we love, we love. We come so much peace and love.
Jesus was actually a Pleiadian spiritual master by the name of Jemanuel. In the Pleiadian star system, he was known as Jemanuel. He was a solar king.
Our higher dimensional brothers and sisters are very aware that our monkey brain, our logical mind, prevents us from fully breaking through the barriers into the cosmic realm, right? And so one way that they are reaching certain individuals right now is through dreams.
Lost an hour in deep meditation and came out with this. I've never done this before. Does anyone know about light code?
Greetings, cherished beings of Earth. I am Mira from the Pleiadian High Council. You stand at the threshold of a cosmic gateway, moving towards the higher dimensions and shedding the dense energies that have long obscured your true essence as multidimensional galactic beings.
Hey there, this is a Pleiadian light language activation. Breathe and open to the light, activating light codes within your DNA, activating consciousness, higher consciousness.
This is just for more loving and connection.
Hello there, and welcome to this Pleiadian contact meditation. I am here to assist you in connecting to your Pleiadian light source. For some of you, this will be an innate starseed connection that you have.
I felt the Pleiadians come to me today in meditation. I recently remembered that I'm a Pleiadian starseed, and I want to describe what the energies felt like and see if anyone resonates. It felt like calming purples or blues, like pure bliss and joy, like white light, very feminine energy, goddess energy, very healing energy, nurturing, mothering, kind.
Very demure, very mindful.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk to the Pleiadian Galactic Council, and they're going to give us information on how to move energy from our celestial chakras to our planetary chakras.
This is a message from the Pleiadians and the Galactic Federation Council. We'd like you all to know about the 144. So the 144 are a group of souls who have been selected and chosen on planet Earth. They do come from different star systems. None of them are Earth souls. They are all star souls. They come from different star systems and different planets. But the 144 are basically people who are in the spotlight, people who have more say and more power. So think about it on planet Earth, how we have celebrities, right? So actors, musicians, some of them are part of the 144. They do want you to know that one of the actors, Keanu Reeves, he is part of the 144.
Kura sati ya shokuria mata ya sukuyama ya kuria shakuria taya saya ya kuria sati ya kura shuturia maya sata ya kuria shaturia mahataya ya shaturia ha nia alwas au shu nia awana yasa ini anawasa ashu.
This is the Palladian Shui Kie Manoi Soyakui Atai. The Palladian Shiatai Sia.
Dia Saturia Mataya Sokuriata Hatiasa. Yakuria Nia Ashu O Nia Au Shu Nia O.
We in the High Council send you emanations of love and gratitude.
Hitler's writings show that in his mind, all races have souls, and all souls have a race. And there is evidence that he at least a little bit believed in all this psychic stuff. The original spirituality of man can be seen, according to Blavatsky, in the fact that mankind once was endowed with psychic powers, which she attributed to the so-called Cyclopean Eye. Blavatsky felt that as man evolved materially and intellectually, this third eye atrophied to what is now the pineal gland, and man mostly lost his psychic powers. But, stated Blavatsky, mankind is destined to regain these abilities. That Hitler was well versed in these racial peculiarities is demonstrated in one of Hermann Rauschning's conversations with Hitler. To have magic insight was apparently Hitler's idea of the goal of human progress. He himself felt that he already had the rudiments of this gift. He attributed to it his success and his future eminence. Speculations of this sort fascinated Hitler, and he would sometimes be entirely wrapped up in them. He saw his own remarkable career as a confirmation of hidden powers. He saw himself as chosen for superhuman tasks, as the prophet of the rebirth of man in a new form. So while white supremacy was pretty ubiquitous across Europe and North America, the idea that there were supernatural qualities at stake, this spread directly from those early backpacking occultists and was used to gain support for even the most violent of methods. According to Wikipedia, by the end of World War I, there were about 75 Volkisch groups in Germany, promoting a variety of pseudo-historical, mystical, racial and anti-Semitic views. This had major influence on the embryonic Nazi Party. Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, "The basic ideas of the National Socialist movement are Volkisch, and the Volkisch ideas are National Socialist." But a student of Guido von List would take these Volkisch ideas a step further. Jörg Lanz von Liebenfels, born Adolf Josef Lanz. Oh, and by the way, the reason why these guys keep adding von something to their names is just to make them sound aristocratic, because the upper classes were the initial target audience for this stuff, because this stuff is inherently hierarchical. So old Jörg was another Austrian occultist, a former monk, and a virulently anti-Semitic writer who would found a magazine called Ostara. Ostara was a German nationalist magazine which described itself as the only and first racial science newspaper. Lanz wrote almost all of the articles himself, and it was widely available throughout Austria. It was cheap to buy, and it could be found in cafes and coffee houses. It is known that Hitler read Ostara, and Lanz himself claimed that a young Hitler had visited him in Austria to try and find back copies for his collection. and it has also been said that copies of Ostara were among Hitler's possessions later in life. Hitler had fought in World War I, and Ostara and other such German nationalist occultist publications were hot shit among the troops in the trenches. It's easy to see why. They were full of tales of the destiny of the Germanic people to hold dominion over others. A number of these early occultists fully believed that World War I was a sign of this destiny manifesting, that not only would Germany prevail, but it would take its rightful place as a world leader. Obviously that didn't happen. Germany lost the war and faced harsh penalties, a huge loss of power, and financial ruin. Anti-German sentiment was perceived everywhere. It seemed to many as if outside forces were trying to destroy everything they held dear. And so when later groups vowed to fulfill these occultist promises of glory, people didn't need that much convincing. Jörg Lanz had also developed a theory based in part on Blavatsky's theosophy, which he called theozoology. According to the German Wikipedia page on Lanz, he formulated a theological doctrine according to which the fall of man consisted in the originally divine Aryans intermarrying with animals. This resulted in inferior races that threatened the legitimate dominance of the Aryans, especially in Germany, where the Aryans were still the most numerous in international comparison. It says that the Theosophical Society as a whole was internationalist and liberal in its orientation. Lanz was the first to absolutize Blavatsky's ideas of the human races into racial biologism. Lanz soon founded himself his own secret society called the New Templar Order, or Ordo Novi Templi. ONT. Fucking nerd. Which was an anti-Semitic, anti-feminist, anti-socialist circle jerk of weirdos. They even bought the ruins of a castle to be their HQ. And in 1907, Lanz hoisted above his castle a flag which bore the same symbol he had previously used to adorn the front pages of his magazine, Ostara. The swastika. Lanz is sometimes called the man who gave Hitler his ideas, but this is contested. They didn't seem to much like each other in later life, and Lanz's little Templar club got banned along with every other minority religion when the Nazis took power. Hitler did often speak critically about mystics and occultists such as Lanz, but what's not clear to me is if this came from a place of skepticism of their ideas, or just like wanting to control information, just securing power and influence away from would-be gurus. Hitler was probably also aware enough to recognise that some of Lanz's ideas might not have vibed well with the populist message that the Nazis needed to portray, at least early on. They initially needed the support of the working class and women, and Lanz was violently opposed to both. It's bad PR. But Lanz himself remained adamant that his work had been a primary influence on Nazi ideology. Writing in Ostara, one shall remember that the swastika and fascist movements are basically offspring of Ostara. And he continued to claim that long after the Nazis fell, until his death in 1954. And when you look at some of the things that Lanz was writing in the publications that Hitler definitely read, you can start to see why. He wrote that now was the time for Germany to rise up and establish a world empire, and to restore the original divinity of the Aryans. But while it is debated how much influence Lanz had on Hitler, what is generally agreed upon is that he was one voice out of many espousing very similar ideas. He was capturing the mood of the time, not creating it. The idea of racial destiny, a destiny which had been stifled in the aftermath of World War I, even if there was debate and arguments over the specifics, this was one of the things which swept the Nazis to power. Not long after Lanz had set up his little secret society, another was formed in Munich. The Thule Society was originally intended to be a study group on German antiquity. which focused on discussing the origins of the Aryan race and, over time, began producing anti-Semitic propaganda in which they proposed that Jews were the mortal enemies of the Aryan race, and which elaborated on a supposed Jewish conspiracy which had to be fought at all costs. The aim of the Tula Society was to establish a dictatorship and expel all the Jewish people from Germany. Members of the Tula Society included Rudolf Hess, who would become Deputy Führer to Hitler, Alfred Rosenberg, who would go on to head the Nazi Office for Foreign Affairs, as well as the Department for Surveillance and Cultural Policy, Hans Frank, who became the head of the general government in Nazi-occupied Poland, Gottfried Feder, who became an economic theoretician for the Nazi government, and Heinrich Himmler, who would head the SS. And Hitler himself was taught how to do public speaking by 2 Tula Society members, one of whom claimed to be a psychic medium. The society was keen to help stop the rise of the left, and eventually became involved in paramilitary efforts against leftist organising, helping to violently stamp out uprisings in Munich. Members of the Tula Society established links with other far-right groups, and in 1919 they formed a political party, the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, DAP, German Workers' Party. And in that same year, Adolf Hitler joined the party, first in the role as a spy, but he quickly learned to quite like it there. By 1920, the party was calling itself the National Socialist German Workers' Party, aka the Nazi Party. I'm not saying that any one individual or group made the Nazis happen. I'm trying to illustrate how acceptance of esoteric, occultist ideas of destiny, ideas of forgotten history, of lost powers and affinity with blood and soil, ideas dismissing the advances of the modern world as degenerate, and a longing to return to some kind of mythical origin. These ideas had been accepted long before Hitler came to rule. The Nazis were not uniquely evil madmen who brainwashed a whole nation and created the environment in which a genocide could happen. That environment already existed, and occultists such as Blavatsky, List, and Lanz, they laid the foundations for it to flourish. And even if Hitler himself didn't believe this stuff, he certainly put people into positions of extraordinary power who definitely did. And he knew that full well. Did you know that the Nazi government also had a department which was basically designed to just go around the world and find antiquities and say that they're probably Aryan? Aryans probably did that pyramid or whatever. Like, they were the first ones to do that whole like mainstream archaeologists are lying to you, ancient alien thing. Like, oh no, the brown people who live here, they couldn't have possibly done all that. No, it must have been a higher being, a higher kind of being that we happen to be descendants of. So technically, if you think about it, this is ours. But they wielded New Age thought so successfully because it already supported their ideas. It's inherently supremacist. They didn't make it that way. And modern New Age ideas are barely any different. And when we add in all these concepts of star seeds and Pleiadians, higher planes of consciousness, it's just a rehashing of the exact same stuff that Himmler was boring his dinner guests with back in the 20s and 30s. Like all that Atlantis stuff. The lost city of Atlantis, as I'm sure you're aware, is a fictional city made up by Plato when he was writing his allegories of the hubris of nations. It wasn't until an awful lot later that European colonizers and explorers began speculating that maybe all this Atlantis stuff was real after all, that maybe old Plato was talking about this new world what we've just discovered. And then, of course, Blavatsky happened. In 1930, Alfred Rosenberg, a Nazi theorist and prominent part of the Nazi government, who was eventually executed for crimes against humanity, published The Myth of the 20th Century. In 1937, Hitler awarded it the State Prize for Art and Science, and by 1944 it had sold over 1 million copies in Germany.
In it, he claims that the Aryans originated in the lost city of Atlantis, and because they were so advanced and noble that this justified enslaving and even murdering any non-Aryan people.
So anyway, I found this on a website called Aspergia. Aspergia is a website that is often cited as being critical to early Aspie supremacy. It's an origin myth for Aspies. It's basically the story of Atlantis but autistic. Atlantis. But no, they went with Aspergia. You know what? It just occurred to me that it might be pronounced Aspergia. Like Asperger's. Jesus Christ. And the Aspergians existed for centuries on their super cool and advanced little island, which was in the middle of the sea. They were largely isolated, except for the occasional visitor from beyond the sea. Until one day, for some reason, the seas began to rise, and so they had to make boats and leave their home forever. They went out into the world and assimilated with other civilizations until all memory of them was lost. Their descendants, however, would still bear their genetics, their special abilities, their gifts, and one day they would remember their history. Today is that day! Powerful stuff.
A forgotten civilization. We call this land Aspergia. We pronounce it so because no one knows what its real name was, or the tongue spoken by its people. Aspergia, a land surrounded by oceans as far as the eye can see. A land of sea-gazing people, Aspergians, who venture into the great waters for fishing, but never the great distances required to find others. They taught their young that each and every person is born with a very specific talent, their special gift, which they must identify if they are to live a full and fulfilling life.
Oh yeah, like the X-Men. Got it.
There were ancient stories told of encounters with other peoples from beyond the sea. They were described as looking similar to the Aspergians, but having different customs and producing very loud sounds which were painful to the ears of the Aspergians.
Those goddamn neurotypical!
I fully understand the impulse to love the mystical, the unexplained, the paranormal. It offers some kind of hope, doesn't it? That there's still mysteries to solve, still things to be discovered, that there could still be something so groundbreaking, so paradigm shifting, as to finally change the world for the better. The idea that we might have more control over ourselves, our lives, our environments, that we might think through tapping into higher powers. It's incredibly alluring. I loved Matilda as much as the next neurodivergent kid. But you know these hippies, these backpacking, barefooted, fisherman pant wearing free spirits. They think they're better than you. They really do. They're always going on about society, how everyone's brainwashed into being materialistic, and with zero understanding of a Marxist analysis of false consciousness either. No, it's all these normies running their rat races for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Why don't they just own nothing and live out of a backpack and work cash-in-hand jobs in countries where you don't even have a work permit like they do? It's easy. It's so simple. All you need to do is open your third eye, connect with the universe, and appreciate the higher things in life, like weed and yoga. Their ideologies are absolutely riddled with hierarchy, and they absolutely believe that they are better than most people. I really hate to think how close I was to buying into some really harmful ideologies, the whole time thinking that I was just learning cool and interesting things. If I had been told as a young teenager that I was a starseed or a Pleiadian or something, I hate to admit it, but I think I might have eaten that shit up. I actually had a small obsession with the Pleiades, the star constellation which I knew as the Seven Sisters. It's that little pork chop shaped cluster that's always super bright and visible. I thought it was cool as hell, like my absolute fave constellation. I spent ages staring at it. If some confident, authoritative adult had told me then that I felt that connection because I'm actually from there, and that's also why I don't fit in with the other kids. I don't know where that would have led me, but it can't have been anywhere good. There's always a danger in thinking that there is some higher, mystical, unknowable justification for things which at best we would usually think are controversial and at worst reprehensible. When some unknown future is presumed to be true and allowed to justify apathy. And that kind of thinking applies way beyond esoteric stuff. Hello, climate doomers. As somebody who loves it so much, I have to concede that magical thinking opens the doors wide open to dismissing the actual material reality of our lives right now. It keeps us from realizing our actual powers, from learning about the ways that we can actually change things for the better. It's atomizing and it's individualist. It's basically the law of attraction with extra steps. See my video on the law of attraction? We don't need to provide material support to people. We don't need to dismantle and replace our systems. We don't need to put in the hard work required to actually care for those who need care. We just need to learn how to meditate better. Just learn how to meditate and then wait for the aliens to come and save us. Or wait until the collective consciousness is operating at a high enough frequency, and then everything will be okay. It's not inherently white supremacist, all of this stuff, but it is inherently stifling of real action. And it puts the blame on the individuals who are struggling because, hey, probably you just didn't meditate well enough. Also, look, I do get that meditation is like a good thing to do. Like it's good for like relieving stress and things like that, like drinking enough water and getting enough sleep, and exercise does. The danger comes when you think that sitting in a room with your eyes closed is somehow benefiting humanity, or worse, thinking that it gives you access to some kind of secret higher knowledge, making you a better person, more open, more aware, more in tune. Honestly, most of the backpacking hippies that I met who meditated all the time were some of the most out of touch people I have ever met in my life. I joke now that I might have ended up in a cult if I'd actually attended half of the events I'd been invited to. Social anxiety for the win. I met a number of cultists over the years, like actual members of actual cults who were trying to recruit for them. And while I did know about the dangers of cults, I didn't know how to immediately spot them. And I didn't know that many of the ideas that I was consuming and espousing on a near daily basis had their origins in some of the worst ideas that humans have ever had.
People that are higher vibrational souls, people that are conscious beings, not NPCs, not organic portals, that actually have souls and personalities.
When this TikTok made it to Twitter, it was roundly mocked for the silliness it is.
Just to let you know, neurotypical people don't have to use any brain power to do things like shower, wash their face, brush their teeth. It happens automatically for them. And they also don't hear any voices while they're doing it. They're not thinking to themselves. So in the morning, they wake up, it's quiet, and their body goes and washes their face and brushes their teeth all by itself. They just fucking wake up and it happens. Like, neurotypical people don't have an inner monologue. That's not a thing. Other people don't have that. It's quiet in their heads.
Some people may wish to defend this creator. They might want to point out that she was referring to the fact that people with ADHD struggle to form habits, and how even daily tasks require intentional thought and effort. That rarely do we do things without thinking, okay, I need to do this thing now. What is the first step? And that's a thing that is worth discussing. But I actually think that this clip is a really good example of how seemingly well-intentioned advocacy can slip into dangerous generalizations. It's one thing to talk about the struggles of neurodivergent people to form habits, but it's quite another to imply that neurotypical people are empty-headed, thoughtless drones. Are neurotypical people just bodies going about the world without thought? How would that work? Like, if they're just bodies going around doing behaviours with zero motivation or autonomy behind them whatsoever, it'd be like they're programmed. Like characters in a video game.
Neurotypical people are just the NPCs of the world.
Neurotypical people are NPCs and you can't convince me otherwise.
All neurotypical people are NPCs.
Neurotypical people are just real-life NPCs.
I don't think simulation theory is true, but if it is, neurotypical people are most definitely the NPCs.
I like to just call NT people NPCs.
I have a theory that neurotypical people are NPCs.
Neurotypical people are just NPCs. Life is a simulation, and we need NPCs to make up what's normal.
They're literally Sims half the time. I have no clue what anyone's saying because they're so passive-aggressive.
The way I can describe having ADHD or being neurodivergent, for me personally, it's like being a main character in a first-person RPG full of ideas and curiosity, and, well, neurotypical people are the NPCs.
NT people might be NPCs.
Neurotypical people are 100% NPCs. They can only follow scripted prompts.
NT people should have been called NPCs because they're basic.
Neurotypical people are NPCs.
Neurotypical straight people are NPCs.
I always see engaging with neurotypicals is like engaging with NPCs with a dialogue wheel. But when meeting with other neurodivergent or autistic folk, it's like another player, and I don't need the dialogue wheel anymore.
Ever since learning about how neurotypicals operate from #ActuallyAutistic Twitter, NTs just all appear as NPCs to me.
I'm going to be completely honest. Neurotypical people are like NPCs to me.
I refuse to believe neurotypical people exist. They've got to be NPCs. There's just no way that's real. Don't you, ironically, feel like almost all NT people live their lives as NPCs, though?
What if all neurodivergent people are in a simulation and the neurotypical people are the NPCs, and that's why they're always depressed?
I'm convinced that neurotypical people are just NPCs.
Being diagnosed with autism is good. Why would you want to be neurotypical? Ah, yes, because we're dehumanizing.
Some may call this junk, but me, I call it junk. Absolute rubbish. Garbage, if you will. Absolute steaming pile of trash takes. If you're a young person watching this, please bear with this slightly older person while they try and explain to other slightly older people what an NPC Wojak is. Oh God. Okay. NPC stands for non-player character and refers to a character in a game who is not controlled by the player. It originally referred to characters in tabletop roleplay games, but these days it more often refers to those background and side characters in video games. I can't assume everyone watching this has played a video game so quickly. While you're running around as the main character playing the game, you've got all these people around. Maybe they have a few lines of dialogue, or they offer you a side quest. Maybe they run the local tavern, market stall, or city guard. Maybe they follow you around on certain quests, but can never keep up. They're the pedestrians you unthinkingly run over with your car, the collateral damage during the shootouts with the other NPCs. They're everyone but the player, and they don't really matter. Now, the NPC Wojak meme is a meme which, like most memes do, started on 4chan, and it was a variant of another kind of Wojak which started on some other kind of chan years earlier. Basically, your NPC Wojak meme gained in popularity in 2016 among conservative, libertarian and far-right circles, as well as your edgy lords who frequent places like 4chan. It was a way to disparage liberals, leftists, social justice warriors, who, according to the memers, don't actually want to challenge the status quo, but rather just repeat slogans unthinkingly. They are told what to think and say, and interacting with them is like in a
video game when you accidentally talk to somebody twice and they give you the exact lines word for word once more.
Like snowflakes, cucks, or libtards. NPC has become a popular insult for criticizing Democrats and other left-leaning web users, accusing them of being unable to think for themselves, parroting orthodoxies of inclusivity rather than challenging mainstream assumptions.
Of course, you know, it was always clear that these mainstream assumptions that needed to be challenged were things like people deserve human rights and like fascism is bad. Challenge it. The whole NPC meme thing is what I believe the kids these days call a cope. I mean, it couldn't possibly be that people genuinely hold ideas of equality and liberty for all, that people are genuinely passionate about fighting discrimination and things like feminism, that everyone isn't as lonely and cynical and self-centered as you. No, they must just be saying all that because they were told to. No, people genuinely think this stuff. You're just a bad person. But aside from it being a massive and cringe as fuck cope, it was also a way to dehumanize vast swathes of people. NPCs don't matter. They aren't real. It also has to do with that simulation hypothesis, which I really don't want to talk about, but I will link some things in the description if you're interested. But briefly, it's a modern adaptation of the how do we know we're not just dreaming question, which philosophers have been chewing on for literal millennia. But there are people like Elon Musk who do think that we're living in a computer simulation because he half read Nick Bostrom but none of his critics. And basically, like, what if part of this simulation was NPCs? That's the thing they say. If you go looking, you'll find loads of videos of NPCs taken by people who think they've spotted a glitch in the system. It's wild.
These are players glitching in real life.
Is exciting for everyone. There are 5 active guys who have never played for the Thunder in chess.
Y'all know how I feel about my neighborhood, right? And how it's a fucking simulation. Like, literally all the houses are the same, right? Why the fuck are all these white cars like dead ass?
Guys, this girl keeps repeating the same thing over and over. She's gonna get out of her car. Watch her. She's done this 3 times.
Look at this. She heard me. She's saying something. Yeah, I'm okay. Are you okay? Okay, no, you are not real. No, ma'am, you are not real.
NPCs don't matter. They aren't real. They are empty-headed, programmed to behave in certain ways, and they get in the way, moving around the world in ways that shows how separated from reality they are. NPCs don't matter. They aren't real. If they die, nothing bad happens. After all, they're just clogging up the place, making life annoying for the adventurers. Maybe if they weren't there, it'd be better. What good do they actually do? I mean, some of them might be useful for some things, but most just aren't. They're just a waste of resources, really. They're not a person in the same way that you're a person. There is a long history of people, white people, trying to determine in exactly what ways other people aren't people in the same way that they're people. To be more specific, in the same way that white, able-bodied, middle and upper class, Christian but not Catholic men are people. From the mid-18th century, focus was on things like phrenology and physiognomy, observations of people's physical characteristics as a way to determine mental traits. In particular, intellectual capacity, criminality, and moral worth. But by the mid-19th century, with interest in evolution booming, the academic fields focused their attention on genetics and the heritability of traits. Everything was explained away by genetics because they had a very simplistic and ideological understanding of it. Science wasn't really science back then. Like, valid discoveries were made, don't get me wrong, but it didn't operate according to the standards of the scientific method which we expect today. All kinds of things were blamed on genes. At one point, they were trying to find a seafaring gene by going to fishing villages and interviewing fishermen and sailors. Oh my god, your dad was also a fisherman? One of the only 3 available jobs in this village? Wow, it must be in the blood. So Darwin, you know him, the evolution guy, he had this cousin who was absolutely obsessed with him. Francis Galton was a bit of an oddball, it seems to me. Someone who loved to learn and research and by all accounts was pretty obsessed with classifying everything, including the hotness of women.
He even made a beauty map of Britain, based on a secret grading of the local women on a scale from attractive to repulsive. The low point was in Aberdeen.
How many horrors need unleashing onto the world by the horniness of men? Francis Galton coined the term eugenics and is widely thought to be the father of the idea. Inspired by Darwin's work on the domestication of animals, old Francis thought that the same logic could, nay, ought to be applied to the human race. And unlike his attempts to statistically quantify the efficacy of prayer, or to perfect the formula for the objectively best cup of tea, eugenics really took off for him. He also did some useful things, like his design for a weather map is still basically what we use now, and some other stuff to do with fingerprints, I don't know, or care. This eugenics thing, this really made a name for Francis Galton. See, the Industrial Revolution had created masses of working poor, which were clogging up the streets of London and getting in the way of rich people's carriages and stuff, which was super annoying and disgusting, and so polite society wanted to do something about it. Some people at the time had wacky ideas such as housing people or taking care of people, blue-haired woke nonsense like that. But that seemed like A, it would take some work, and B, as if environmental changes mattered. Couldn't possibly be true. Class was seen as something which was ingrained, innate. And there was plenty of empirical proof for this. I have conducted empirical research. I went outside and looked around, and I have observed that poor people live poor and die poor. And furthermore, the offspring of said poors are also poor. Furthermore, I have noted that those who were born wealthy also typically die wealthy. It has become clear to me through my observations and upon consulting with acquaintances of mine who are knowledgeable on such matters, that when the wealthy reproduce, their offspring inevitably become wealthy themselves. And as we have discussed, the same goes for the poors. So, what good would actually helping them do? After all, if class were merely a condition of circumstances that one happens to find themselves born into, then that would mean that the upper classes don't deserve to be there, and it's absurd. Eugenics was first used to support the idea that class, and therefore poverty, was genetic. And this was explained through the lens of mental capacity, intelligence. I'm going to talk a whole lot more about intelligence later, but just quickly, these early eugenics guys were obsessed with the idea of genius. Obsessed. And how did Sir Francis of Galton go about quantifying this? By observing the successful. I kid you not, this man just went out there and went like, okay, who's rich? Who's successful? Who's the leaders of their oh my god, it's white middle and upper class men. Good for them. And so Francis Galton concluded that intelligence was inherited through the male genes of the upper class. I kid you not. Arsel went and wrote a seminal work based off that too. According to Galton's brain thoughts, this man should be at the peak of genetic superiority. I'm not joking or being unfair or hyperbolic or anything when I say that these early eugenicists genuinely thought that the reason that they were rich and had nice lives were because they were intelligent enough to see the utility of wealth, whereas all those feeble-minded poors simply don't realise that living in a big house with servants is nice. One of the first acts of the early London eugenicists was to close down homes for inebriated women. They closed down welfare programs all over the place, and they also focused as well on positive eugenics. That's the idea of positively selecting for desirable traits. This mostly involved pressuring people, especially middle and upper class women, to be very selective about who they have babies with, and then to have as many as possible. At points, they even managed to paint this as some kind of feminism, empowering women to choose, despite it being the opposite, cementing the idea that it's a woman's duty to better humanity by becoming a birthing machine to selected men, which is a theme that still runs strongly on the right today. Couples who were deemed to be eugenic were encouraged to have as many babies as possible, and the name Eugene skyrocketed in popularity. But despite attempts, notably from Winston Churchill, negative eugenics in the form of sterilisation of the feeble-minded never made it into law in the UK. While the Western world was becoming captivated by ideas of genetics and evolution, those with privilege and power were working on novel applications of these ideas, applications which would work towards the purity of the race. Evolution was hardly understood by people who could not keep that word out of their mouths. By many in the 18th and early 19th century, evolution was seen as a ladder, a hierarchy, from least evolved to more evolved, from the least human to the most human. And the way that this would be determined would be based solely on the subjective observations of white upper-class men and explorers. Humans would be ranked based on their proximity to whiteness, and theories would be created to support the idea that the white race, the Caucasian race, the Aryan race were the most evolved, the most human. Before evolution, Europeans usually rested on polygenism to explain humanity. That's the idea that human races have different origins, that perceived races came into existence separately, almost classifying them as different species. From Wikipedia. During the late 17th century and early 18th century, many countries first began to encounter different races from other countries due to colonial expansion and increases in trade routes. Because of the encounters with different races, many people could not believe that they had the same ancestry as other races. Many explorers and scientists visited other countries to observe and study different races and write down their findings. Later, they went back to their own countries to publish books and journals on their findings and claim that the evidence supported polygenism. In Europe, in the 19th century, the general public had favoured polygenism, as many believed it contradicted the Genesis account and was thus more scientific than religious monogenism. Basically, it's science because it's the opposite of what the Bible says. Monogenism is the idea that humanity had one single origin. But polygenism was mad popular. I often cite David Hume, but he was a massive polygenist. So was Voltaire, and a huge number of European explorers and academics. Polygyny was the first tool of the race scientists, but there's a problem with using polygyny to do racism, because different doesn't automatically mean worse. You have to do some extra mental gymnastics to kind of show that certain races are superior or inferior. But evolution, the wrong idea that humans evolved in a linear manner from mostly like monkeys to actually human, well, that provided a much better rationale for racism.
People with autism are operating on a higher plane of humanity. They hold up half the sky. They are the next stage of human evolution.
I believe that those with autism are part of the next stage in human evolution. They think and see things on a level we can't. Evolution has not perfected it yet, but maybe the normal people, as society has labelled us, are the weird ones for not evolving.
I low-key think that increasing rates of Asperger's and autism is the next stage of human evolution. Developing a sixth sense almost that presents itself with sensory issues.
Autism is the next stage of human evolution, and you're apparently too ignorant and ableist to understand the distinction between illness and divergence.
Know why more and more autistic people exist? It's nothing bad. It's not being caused by a product or a vaccine. What we are here referring to as autism is actually the next stage of human evolution. Calling us a disease is simply the old model diagnosing the new as defective.
Autism is the next stage of evolution. Cope and seethe, neurotypicals.
Autism isn't an illness. It's probably the next stage of human evolution.
The doctors call it autism, but really it's just the next stage of human evolution.
Next stage? It's existed since time immemorial. All these guys had it. Probably. Also a bunch of people who weren't painted or photographed too.
Ongoing process, not the final development yet. Give it a few more generations.
The idea of evolution as a ladder persists. I mean, I guess it's quite difficult to draw it any other way than this, but it's not so structured. It's not in any way so simplistic. Our genetics are unfathomably complex and exposed to thousands of variables. What's passed on or not is almost impossible to predict, because it's not just that there is a gene for a thing. There's not a depression gene or an anxiety gene or a seafaring gene. I couldn't possibly explain to you exactly how modern humans evolved, and not just because this video is already too long, but because the people who know don't even know. We're still discovering all kinds of crap. Did you see that thing about the cave? And Homo naledi? And how they were burying their dead 100,000 years before Homo sapiens even existed, and 300,000 years before we thought the first burials took place. Look at this absolute mess from Wikipedia. According to the recent African origin of modern humans theory, modern humans evolved in Africa possibly from Homo heidelbergensis, Homo rhodensiensis, or Homo antecessor, and migrated out of the continent some 50,000 to 100,000 years ago, gradually replacing local populations of Homo erectus, Denisova hominins, this was a mistake, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, and Homo Neanderthals. I mean, they've got things narrowed down, but there's a lot of wiggle room there. There was overlap, crossbreeding, coexistence. All kinds of variables which make the ladder view of evolution look kind of silly in my eyes. But racists in the 19th and early 20th century took this view of evolution as a ladder and ran with it. Boy, did they run. It was perfect. White people are simply the most evolved, the least like animals. And for a while, they set out placing people on this hierarchy based on their physical characteristics. But this was muddy work. Physical characteristics aren't ubiquitous across races, and a great deal of liberty was taken with the analysing of data. They needed something more stable on which to rest their ideology, a more scientific way to ascertain where on the evolutionary hierarchy a person ought to be placed. And the thing that they would come to lean on, the tool they would wield to do great atrocities, was intelligence. Hans Asperger described autistic children as little professors, partly because of their unusual way of speaking, but mostly because of their ability to talk at length and in detail about things which interested them, like little professors teaching a class. Or YouTubers. The info dump is well known, and it's also well known that autistic people can get a lot of joy out of the info dumps of others. Okay, I'm gonna stop saying dump now. The DSM talks about like restricted intense interests or something, but we usually call it special interests. And it is now a well-worn trope for autistic characters in media. Many autistic people have special interests, but it behooves you to remember throughout this discussion that not all do. Special interests is just one subcategory of the diagnostic checklist that you don't actually need to meet in order to be diagnosed. Many autistic people have multiple special interests, sometimes all at once, and other times it fluctuates over time. That's more or less how I am. My special interests can be very intense to the point where I don't want to nor can think effectively about other things. I felt this way about books, TV shows, movies, cats, the paranormal, macrame at one point, plants and growing food, philosophy, politics, British parliamentary politics circa 2016 to 2019. Seriously, ask me anything. Autism and neurodiversity was a special interest of mine for a long time. And it's not like I'm over these things, I'm still deeply invested in them, I still want to learn more about them, still want to talk about them. Just ask my friends how often I wedge Jeremy Corbyn into conversations. I've spoken before on this channel about how I lost months of my life to my Xbox, basically unable to do anything other than work and game. Special interests can result in PhDs, but also vitamin D deficiencies. Special interests can turn harmful when the autistic person becomes unable to regulate themselves while participating, when we forget to drink water and use the bathroom, to keep ourselves moving and washed and fed. But special interests can be extremely comforting to autistic people. Engaging with your special interest can actually be one of the best ways to regulate yourself, to calm down in times of stress. What makes an interest special is the intensity of the interest, the amount of time one wishes to spend on it, the amount of mental energy one dedicates to it. It's the thing that motivates, creates joy, gets you out of bed in the morning, reminds you that there are actually some really cool things in this world after all. And so autistic people can spend an awful lot of time reading up on their interest, gathering as much knowledge about it as they possibly can, and also taking great joy in sharing this knowledge with others. But I want to put this delicately, because many autistic people do become experts, like world leaders in their fields. And probably a bunch of people in the past who invented stuff were actually autistic too. I think we do often provide a unique way of looking at things. And I do think that our ability to be perfectly happy, deep diving into subjects, dedicating huge parts of our lives to our passion, that this means that we are more likely to discover stuff, that we are more likely to connect ideas in novel ways, more likely to spot patterns and predict possible outcomes. I think it means that we are more likely to pursue careers that involve research, experimentation, and discovery. Like, theoretical physics probably is a field which autistic people are more likely to pursue. Because you need to be really dedicated to that shit just to understand it. But But don't get me wrong, okay? But like, none of that means that autistic people are just inherently better at understanding things, or even B, that if a subject is an autistic person's special interest, then that means that they are always right about it. Just let that sit for a sec. Let that sink in. Oh, I'm getting nervous.
Being autistic means I need clarity. I need understanding of information. I need to understand everything about it. When I question what you've asked me or what you've told me or the information you've provided me, I'm trying to understand it in its entirety. For me, if I don't have the full picture, it's hard for me to engage in a task, because what if there's a variable I've missed?
You can never know all of the variables. And the implication that when an autistic person says, yeah, I understand that thing, that means they know everything there is to know about it. No, I don't like the implication. It's a bad implication. Yes, we often do need more information than some other people might before we are fully able to conceptualize a thing. But you can spend hours, days, years even, reading about a topic and still never actually read anything that is worthwhile or true. Just log on to any New Age Homeopathy Raw Milk Mum Facebook group and see for yourself. Just because somebody has read a lot or dedicated a lot of time to a topic, that doesn't in itself mean that they are an expert on that thing. I was talking to a young man once, I think he was about 19, and he said, I don't consider myself to be an expert on anything except for physics, which is what I'm studying at university. I wonder, if you consider yourself to be an expert while you're in your first year of an undergrad program, what do you think your professor is? I have heard numerous people say that an autistic person with a special interest will know more than experts in that field because they will have read everything, absolutely everything on the topic. They will have covered every possible variable. But to read everything on a topic is probably impossible. And to read up-to-date research on many academic subjects, you will need access to journals and publications which aren't usually available to the public, and if they are, the articles are horrendously expensive. But it is possible for an autistic person with a special interest to know more than people who are actually working in a field. For example, I think I know more about my health problems than my GP does, and I think she'd happily admit that too. It's not her area of expertise. She's a doctor, but I know more about EDS than her, and that's fine. She's not a specialist. She doesn't need to. It's perfectly possible for an autistic kid to know more about plants than their biology teacher, or for an autistic member of a guided tour to know more about the movie franchise than the tour guide. And it's also possible for non-autistic kids to know more about certain subjects than their teachers. It happens. Sometimes we do. But it's not a rule that we can apply generally, nor is it an assumption we can make. I do think we think differently, because I do think that we experience the world differently. And yes, I think everybody experiences the world differently. But I also think that there are enough shared kinds of differences, which is how we group people into being autistic or not. But we are not more or less intelligent. We are not better at thinking. Many autistic people have learning disabilities. I've said it before, I think I have dyscalculia. I'm not in any rush to get tested, but I'm pretty sure. I needed special assistance at school to scrape a passing grade in maths. And that was after my maths teacher predicted that I would get a U grade. U stands for ungraded. You're so bad, you didn't even fail. We're not even going to bother marking you. She put that on one of my final year reports, that I would get a U in maths, and then it was this whole thing because then I couldn't get into college and I had to get extra tuition, and I hated it. And I hated her. But no, I can't even understand sentences if they have too many numbers in them. When I hear a number, conceptually, nothing happens. And that trope of autistic people being dead good at numbers is actually something that put me off the scent of my own autism for a really long time. According to the NHS, 29% of people who have learning disabilities are also autistic, and autistic people do not, on average, have higher IQs than the general population. But you wouldn't think that if you heard some of us talk.
Wow. Autistic people have more neurons, higher connectivity within the brain, and are generally more intelligent than neurotypicals. So why have you guys decided autistic people are disordered when you are literally cognitively stunted, if not autistic? If we are being objective.
I've come to the conclusion that autistic people, whether they're high functioning or not, are more often than not far more intelligent, insightful, and astute as compared to those who are not autistic.
Autistic people in general have higher IQs than most, lol. They're like superhumans. Autistic people are far more intelligent, empathetic, kind, caring, and discerning than the average human.
Wait till he finds out autistic people are more intelligent on average.
Maybe it's just autistic people are more logical, and more logical people make better product decisions. Studies show autistic people are more logical and rational, and we tend to ask questions. Religion hates that. Not even close, my G. You have no idea the shite I know. Plus, I'm autistic, so my brain works 10 times faster than the average brain.
Hey, autistic people are generally far more intelligent than normal people. So maybe keep your mouth shut.
The autistic genius trope is, in my opinion, an incredibly harmful invention of Hollywood. But I see it being embraced as an identity in certain corners of the internet. I've had a few run-ins now with people who have genius in their bio, or who have gifted or their IQ in there somewhere. I'm not upset about this because of the statistics or the harmful tropes, no. I'm upset because IQ is racist, classist, misogynistic bollocks.
In 1892,
France passed a law that said that all children, except for blind and deaf kids, should be in education. But by 1904, teachers had started to complain that some children were simply unable to follow the curriculum which was in place. And so the French powers that were decided that these children would be exempt from the law. But what to do with them? It was argued by French psychiatrists that these children should be placed into the care of hospitals and asylums. But French psychologist Alfred Binet argued that instead of treating them like medical conditions, children who were struggling to follow the curriculum should be instead given specialist education. He knew that the French government would need a scalable way to determine what kinds of help these children needed, and that teachers would need a way to test the children in their class. And so he developed the Binet-Simon test, commonly known as the first ever IQ test. But our Alfred would have hated that, and we're about to learn why. So Binet initially tried to use craniology, but he quickly realised that it's a load of rubbish, all this skull measuring stuff. He couldn't even replicate his own findings, let alone anyone else's. So he stopped trying to find intellect in the physical, and instead turned to psychology. His tests largely asked subjects to identify and interact with pictures, and there were many, many varied questions. In fact, he argued that there should be as many as possible to better determine the individual needs of the child. But Binet was super freaking clear about a couple of things. Firstly, his tests should never, not ever, be used preemptively. Rather, it should only be administered after a teacher has identified that a child is struggling. Secondly, he was pretty adamant that his tests do not measure intelligence.
The scale, properly speaking, does not permit the measure of the intelligence because intellectual qualities are not superposable and therefore cannot be measured as linear surfaces are measured.
Binet was the inventor of the mental age in the sense that his tests determined how many years behind their peers was the subject, and a child that was 3 years behind their peers was labelled retarded, chosen from the Latin word to be held back or slow. But Binet did warn about placing too much meaning on all this mental age stuff.
We feel it necessary to insist on this fact because later, for the sake of simplicity of statement, we will speak of a child of 8 years having the intelligence of a child of 7 years or 9 years. These expressions, if accepted arbitrarily, may give place to illusions.
Illusions. Illusions of being able to meaningfully measure intelligence, and illusions about what those pseudo-measurements might mean. Binet's tests were only designed to see if a particular child was struggling with a particular curriculum at a particular time, and nothing more. Binet saw the dangers of what he had created. He worried that lazy teachers would use his tests to just get rid of difficult students. He worried that a bad score might create a self-fulfilling prophecy and ruin the prospects and opportunities awarded to a child. Binet did not believe that intelligence was measurable or innate. At that time, as we've learned, hereditarianism was the prevalent way of looking at race, genetics, personality traits, class, bloody everything. It's the ideology on which eugenics rested. Binet wasn't a hereditarian, and he never intended what came to be. From The Mismeasure of Man.
But of one thing Binet was sure. Whatever the cause of poor performance in school, the aim of his scale was to identify in order to help and improve, not to label in order to limit.
The purpose of his tests was to provide, but they would soon be used to remove millions of people of their rights, bodily autonomy, freedom of movement, and their lives. So what happened? From The Mismeasure of Man.
Binet insisted upon 3 cardinal principles for using his test. All of his caveats were later disregarded and his intentions overturned by the American hereditarians who translated his scale into written form as a routine device for testing all children. Number 1. The scores are a practical device. They do not buttress any theory of intellect. They do not define anything innate or permanent. We may not designate what they measure as intelligence or any other rarefied entity. Number 2. The scale is a rough empirical guide for identifying learning disabled children who need help. It is not a device for ranking all children. Number 3. Whatever the cause of difficulty in children identified for help, emphasis shall be placed on improvement. Low scores shall not be used to mark children as innately incapable.
Henry Herbert Goddard was an American psychologist, eugenicist, and segregationist who got his hands on a copy of the Binet-Simon test and lost his fucking mind. He was a proper piece of work. He wrote a book called The Kallikak Family, a study in the heredity of feeble-mindedness, which became the primary text proving the truth of hereditary feeble-mindedness. The text was so full of holes that even Goddard himself admitted it was pretty sloppy work, but of course, not before it was a huge hit. Goddard translated the Binet-Simon test into English, and he turned it into a written test which could be given to people on a mass scale, in order to classify the human race. Goddard used his tests to classify people as follows.
Goddard used the term moron for those with an IQ of 51 to 70, imbecile for those with an IQ of 26 to 50, and idiot for those with an IQ of 0 to 25. Morons, according to Goddard, were unfit for society and should be removed either through institutionalization, sterilization, or both.
At one point, Goddard suggested that morons should be exiled to a colony to perish. He was particularly concerned about morons, was Goddard. They were the worst ones, in his opinion, because they were more likely to breed. In fact, he even said that they were more likely to be promiscuous. Later in life, Goddard decided that actually, instead of being sent away or locked up, that morons could be put to work, of course, as long as they were prevented from breeding. At that time, American leaders and members of the elite were growing increasingly concerned about immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe. You see, immigration used to be a good thing, back when it was the British and the Germans and the French coming over. But now it's the Polish and the Hungarians and the Russians and the Italians. No, now it's a threat to the racial purity of the land. American hereditarians and eugenicists were freaking out, and great replacement-esque theories began to take hold across academia and politics. And so, the idea that we could use a written test to weed out the undesirables and stop them from even being in the country at all, well, you can see why it appealed. Goddard had concluded that there was a feeble-mindedness gene, because of course he did, and wouldn't this be a great way of filtering it out? One of the first uses of Goddard's new version of the Binet-Simon test was on Ellis Island. It was given to immigrants fresh off the boat, literally as soon as they stepped off the boat. Testing conditions were atrocious, and the tests themselves were even worse. They required previous knowledge of American brands and cultural references. They required subjects to know what a written test was even for at a time when they were literally brand new concepts. They required subjects to know how to write with a pencil, and the language barrier. Did they translate things? No, of course they didn't. That would be too hard. Nobody speaks Italian. No, the language barrier led to examiners going to really rather creative lengths to be understood, which only confused subjects more. They were trying to mime concepts. The data from these tests was used to determine the average IQ of different European countries. And would you believe it? But immigrants from Britain, Germany and France came out on top. And at the bottom came the immigrants from the southern and eastern European countries. When we think back on historical racism, I think we tend to project our modern understanding of it onto the past. These people were racist to such a granular extent that they were separating North Germans from Southern Germans. And the tippity-top bestest race that you could possibly be if you were an immigrant to the USA back then was Nordic. These guys were so hard for the Nords, I swear to God.
You have good genes, you know that, right? You have good genes. A lot of it's about the genes, isn't it? Don't you believe? The racehorse theory, you think we're so different? You have good genes in Minnesota.
This is a map of the supposed races of Europe, and each group was assigned a different average IQ. Just look at this shit for a sec. But the data from the immigration centres wasn't enough for some people. People who wanted psychology to be seen as a legitimate science, which at the time it was not. People like Robert Yerkes. Robert really wanted psychology to be treated like a real science, but the results from the earlier IQ tests weren't robust enough for that. There wasn't enough data, and there was too much variation in the way that previous tests had been administered. So he assembled an elite team of hereditarian eugenicists to create a new test, which would be administered to members of the armed forces. They created the first mass-produced intelligence tests, commonly known as the Army Alpha-Beta tests, and they ended up with 1.75 million results to work with. Huge amounts of data, which could now be directly used to lend scientific legitimacy to the field of psychology and also racism. By the 1920s, mass testing had arrived, and the newly formed testing industry became immensely profitable. And the results of the Army and the Ellis Island tests were immediately used to define racial averages of intelligence. But those Army tests were as deeply flawed as the Ellis Island ones. I can't get into the many reasons why the math was not mathing, but rest assured, the methodology was fucked at every level. So one example, they should have recalled loads of soldiers to be retested as per their own rules, but they just didn't. And so hundreds of mostly black soldiers were just left with inaccurate low scores. Another example, they got way too many zeros. So usually if you're running a test and you get an unexpectedly high number of zeros, that usually means there's something wrong with your test. And the examiners at the time even said as much. And it's not surprising when you consider that they were just cramming soldiers into rooms and then verbally calling out the instructions for each question. So the people at the back just didn't hear. And this didn't come up in my reading. I'm just spitballing here. But I wonder what kind of soldier or person would always end up at the back of the room in the 1920s. There was also significant pressure on the test subjects. The tests were not anonymous and they weren't even told why they were taking them. And at times, the examiners would just be shouting at them, like, do it quicker, fast, like it was timed, and they were just like, quicker, work harder, now, fast, blah. Just, ooh. And of course, the tests, again, required previous knowledge, which they should not do if they're trying to measure innate intelligence. And on top of all that, the army bosses absolutely hated the whole thing. They didn't like these psychologists coming in and demanding their time and resources. Remember, psychology was not seen as a legitimate science back then. And so the examiners faced a lot of skepticism, even hostility. Based army generals? No, probably not. And then, after even all of that, they basically cooked the numbers anyway. And they denied any environmental explanation for low results, because of course they bloody did. The data from the Army and Ellis Island tests were used to 1. Decide that the average mental age of the population was 13, which is just above what had been decided as Mormon territory. This fueled the idea that a lot of people were incapable of critical, intelligent thought, who needed to be told what to do and controlled by their intellectual betters. A perfectly fascistic idea if ever I heard one. In fact, Goddard published data from the army tests and wrote that this was proof that most Americans are unfit for democracy. 2. The data was used to prove that European migrants could have their intelligence ranked simply based on what country they came from. And finally, it determined that Black people had a mental age of 10. At times, it did seem to these hereditarian testers of intelligence that maybe their data was a little bit off, and maybe most people aren't morons. But every time this happened, every time one of them brought that up, they simply just arbitrarily shifted their parameters to make their findings seem more plausible. And again, when presented with the idea that, hey, maybe environment and education can explain high results in certain people, they were just like, nah, that's silly. No, you see, it's because naturally intelligent people choose to get educated, actually. Obviously. Henry Goddard said that to test somebody's intelligence was ascertaining by far the most important fact about them. Lewis Terman, psychologist, eugenicist, and co-developer of the army tests, said in 1916 that the primary cause of social pathology was innate feeble-mindedness. He wanted everyone to be tested, and he didn't want to just use the tests to weed out the feeble-minded. He wanted to use them to identify genius. He encouraged employers to test all of their employees, and he said that only those with an IQ over 100 should be given any responsibility. And he wholeheartedly believed that entire racial groups could be declared less intelligent. General intelligence. IQ. This became the primary tool of eugenicists and white supremacists.
Eugenicist sterilization laws had existed in the USA since 1907, when Indiana passed the first ever eugenics-based compulsory sterilization law in the world. 3 years later, in 1909, California passed its laws. And by 1921, California accounted for 80% of all the sterilizations performed in the USA. But these state laws were opaquely worded and there was issues with the implementation of them.
and for this reason many states had held back on implementing their own laws. That was until Mr. Harry H. Laughlin, an educator and eugenicist, made it his mission to simplify these sterilization laws. By 1914, a mere 12 states had imposed compulsory sterilization laws, and to Mr. Laughlin, this was weak shit. From Wikipedia.
Laughlin drafted the Model Eugenical Sterilization Law, a model act for compulsory sterilization. He published his proposal in his 1922 study of American sterilization policy. It included as subjects for eugenic sterilization the feeble-minded, the insane, criminals, epileptics, alcoholics, blind persons, deaf persons, deformed persons, and indigent persons. An additional 18 states passed laws based on Laughlin's model.
One of Laughlin's biographers described him as among the most racist and anti-Semitic of early 20th century eugenicists. Again, from Wikipedia.
Laughlin provided extensive statistical testimony to the United States Congress in support of the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act of 1924. Part of his testimony dealt with excessive insanity among immigrants from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. He also argued that most Jews were born feeble-minded.
Laughlin lobbied hard to keep Jewish refugees who were fleeing Europe out of the United States, and he got his way. In 1933, something called the Law for the Prevention of Hereditary Diseased Offspring passed in Nazi Germany, based extremely closely on Laughlin's model. Up to 800,000 people were sterilized in the first year alone. And in 1933, Harry Laughlin would be awarded an honorary degree for his work on the science of racial cleansing at the University of Heidelberg, Germany. Every single eugenicist and IQ enthusiast that we have covered today somehow paved the way for American sterilization laws. Laws which directly inspired Adolf Hitler. Not only did he base his sterilization laws on American ones, but in 1928 he spoke highly of the Immigration Act for banishing strangers of the blood. And when Nazi legislators were framing their own laws, the US Immigration Act was cited favorably due to its ability to exclude wholly foreign racial population masses. A story which began with the provision of education for French children would end up back in Europe with the mass murder of thousands of German children. Is this a video about Aspie supremacy or a documentary on the history of eugenics? Yes. I'm not here to point out that Aspie supremacy talking points share similarities with white supremacy talking points. I'm here to say that they're the exact same thing. It is eugenics. It is hereditarianism. It is deterministic. It is hierarchical. It's basically a step away from phrenology, just like IQ tests are. I mean, if you believe that being autistic makes you a better person, more intelligent, more morally correct, more honest and trustworthy, more deep thinking, more critically thinking, more empathetic even, sure, why not? I've heard people say it. Then you believe that physical characteristics determine personality traits. Just like the physiognomists. Exactly like every old white guy who argued that genetics are deterministic. Autism is genes and brains and shit. And there are things that we can say about it all and how it all coalesces and stuff, you know, like the diagnostic criteria or whatever. But all autistic people are different. Environment does matter. If you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. We don't share a personality. And there are plenty of shitty autistic people out there doing incredibly unwise things, and I would rather not provide them with this kind of cover. If you think that autism is the next step in human evolution, then that means you think of evolution like steps, just like all those twats. Oh, it's just so awful, isn't it? It's just so very pointedly cringe.
Did someone say cringe? Asperger's is a unique set of traits which is very likely to be the driver behind some of the greatest human achievements to date. Asperger's is the single-minded determination behind invention and innovation, and the ability to create something different to standard thinking. Human minds are locked within their barriers of social acceptability. Asperger's allows the expansion beyond this. Nature manufactures us repeatedly. Perhaps there is an evolutionary reason for this. Perhaps these extra traits have a special role to play in the progression of humankind. We need to take ownership of our future. We need to understand that we are possibly one of the best things that happened to human development.
That's not how evolution works. An evolutionary reason. I can't get into evolutionary psychology now. I won't. But there are a bunch of evo-psych-based things that people say to try and explain autism, which I absolutely hate, but I can't. It's too late. I've been writing this thing for months. That's not how it works. Evolution doesn't have reasons. It doesn't use logic to make decisions about how it should go. It's not there for the betterment of our societies. That's religious thinking. You're doing a religion. Evolution is a complex mess of coincidence, variables, random mutations, change which happens over a really, really, really long time. It doesn't come in steps. It's ever fluctuating fluid, and we're only just beginning to understand it. If you are basing your identity, your worth as a person in being intelligent, if you are dedicating part of your bio to your IQ, then honestly, I don't hate you for it. We've got to have something, don't we? Us nerdy, introverted kids, it's either be clever or funny, innit? It's often the thing that gets us geeky, neurodivergent kids through school, innit? Being good at something. The hope that one day you'll get to do that thing and you'll be respected for being good at it. I don't want to take that hope away from anyone. And if being clever is the thing that is getting you through, then fine. But if you are clever, then you'll want to think a little bit deeper about how we view things such as intelligence and IQ and genius. IQ tests do show something. They show that you're good at taking IQ tests, and that is something. And you don't need to be a rocket surgeon to know that there are many different types of intelligence. In his book, The Mismeasure of Man, Gould argues that the main mistake that all those guys made, and it's a mistake that we still make today, is thinking that there is such a thing, a measurable, quantifiable thing as general intelligence. The reification of intelligence, he called it. That book was one of my main sources for this video, and at the time he published it, IQ was getting a bit of a resurgence in popularity. Gould could not believe what he was witnessing. The evidence for general intelligence, like that can be measured with IQ tests, is not even thin on the ground. It's basically non-existent. IQ tests were designed by hereditarians in order to prove an hereditarian theory of intelligence and nothing more. Not supposed to be designing tests to prove hypotheses, we're supposed to be testing them. And they didn't even mention the bell curve. Gould wrote that the bell curve was completely disingenuous and manufactured pseudoscience. He called the text a manifesto of conservative ideology. It's a book. It was published in 1994 and it was hugely popular. It cited a load of white supremacists and it led to a boom in interest in IQ. Yay! It's not your fault if you didn't know all that. If you didn't know that general intelligence is a completely fabricated tool of race science. But you do now. And it's not your fault if you took a little glee in the trash talking of neurotypicals. I mean, whomst among us has not? Jokes are jokes. I'm not going to judge disabled people for taking the piss out the ableds. But I don't know. Sometimes.
What has autism taught you about people? That neurotypical people are easily programmed, easy to control and fill up with hatred.
An actually autistic person's ethics are consistent, regardless of how they feel about you. Even if they dislike you, they'll still treat you with integrity. A neurotypical will change their ethics towards you based on whether they like or dislike you. There is no integrity.
Autistic people tend to have lower empathy. Neurotypical liars who have no idea what empathy is.
To be honest, the best way to deal with it that I've found is to divest from connections with non-autistic people as much as possible, and have subterranean expectations of them so you're always prepared for their antics.
I've regularly experienced people telling me to unalive myself for being unashamedly autistic. So I'm not going to be one of those people who are kind or supportive of neurotypicals. Or holistics.
American Psycho implies heavily that your average neurotypicals are, in fact, sociopaths.
Yeah, neurotypical people are illiterate dumbasses, for sure. It's kind of funny how they think I cannot have complex emotions. Wait till they find out I can do things on my own. Wow, shocking, right? You're a man as well. Hope you know that.
After knowing what holistics, and especially neurotypicals, are like, I avoid them like COVID. Gross.
I hate neurotypicals so much. I hope bad things happen to them, Sai.
The fact that they need studies done before they believe this incredibly obvious fact is the clearest evidence that neurotypicals are the absolute dumbest people on God's green earth. Can't even begin to fathom what it must be like to go through life this pathologically stupid.
It's hard to trust neurotypicals because you never know when they're being fake.
Neurotypicals are muggles.
This is all that neurotypicals are thinking about, by the way. This is literally the most profound thoughts that go through their head.
Neurotypicals are slippery. Talking to them is like nailing jello to a wall.
I fucking hate neurotypicals so much sometimes. Just fuck off and enjoy your privilege.
The way I hate neurotypicals so much, their irrelevant, invalid opinion means nothing. They are literally the worst.
I'm convinced a lot of them derive some sick and twisted, and in cases sexual pleasure from the fact that they keep us in positions which is not suited to our strengths.
I hate you neurotypical people so much.
I think actually autistic people need to know that to their minds, we're already guilty. They don't care.
It's to boost their egos at our expense. Also to eliminate us as perceived competition for garbage that matters only to them, like popularity or acquiring social or economic capital, etc.
It's not like I feel sorry for neurotypical people, and anger among neurodivergent people is justified. We are mistreated. We are forced to exist in a world which was designed without us in mind. We are forced to endure our existence being a matter for debate. We are traumatized and abused, and so what if we take a little moment to feel special? Nobody else is going to recognize the things which make us special, so why shouldn't we? We should. We always should. I celebrate my autism just as much as I consider it to be a disability. We are unique. Just like everyone else. No, I hate this vitriolic way of speaking about neurotypical people. Not just because of the supremacist vibes, not just because it's mostly factually inaccurate, but because I worry about the young autistic people listening to it. It must be scary, I'd imagine, to think that so many people are inherently dishonest, manipulative, and abusive. Must make you feel pretty lonely. Especially if your neurodivergent friends are online or few and far between. And let's face it, for most of us, that's probably the case. Must be pretty isolating, fear-inducing. If I was an autistic kid listening to some of the descriptions about neurotypical people, I think the last thing that I would want to do is enter society as an adult. I could imagine it provoking feelings of paranoia, even when you know that you will never know what these people really mean because they speak in riddles just to confuse you. They lie and manipulate, and they hate honesty. They are incapable of empathizing with you. They are dangerously stupid, but also they have power over you, and of course, they hate you. And I wonder about the kind of person who might have an interest in conditioning or, say, grooming a population of already very vulnerable people into distrusting everyone around them, into becoming more isolated than they already are. It seems to me that this general distrust of all neurotypical people might create the kinds of people who extremists, con artists, cultists, and predators love to prey on. Just so we're clear, I'm not calling any of the people I featured in this video a predator or a Nazi. I'm talking about ideas, not people. I worry about the fascists too. I worry that they might see the utility in the autistic population like they did back then. The goal of fascist supremacists is power, and they will stroke the egos of anybody they find useful until they do not anymore. Do you think it's a coincidence that we're seeing a rise in divine femininity discourse right at the same time that fertility rates are dropping and attacks on reproductive rights are climbing? When a sense of your own superiority is internalized, then considering others to be less than you is built in. And when you think that other people, any other kind of people, are worth less than you, don't matter as much as you, don't produce as much as you, aren't people in the same way that you are a person, no good will come from any kind of worldview which implies supremacy or hierarchy. There will be no freedom from oppression until everyone is free. There should be no room for supremacist notions anywhere, least of all within a movement which considers itself to be progressive. There is absolutely no justification for it. You can think that you're at the top of some hierarchy if you want, but unless you actually are, like unless you're a billionaire or a dictator or something, dictators watching this, please do leave a comment below. Unless you're one of those things, you are probably being played by someone who is. I do think that autistic people have unique abilities, and I also think that many of the things that should have been celebrated about us have been held against us. I think all marginalized people have unique perspectives of the world and the structures within it, perspectives which are integral to the dismantling and improvement of those structures. But no one is free until everyone is free. Those supremacist notions about who does and does not deserve to be free can be turned against you the second you stop being useful. We like to talk about history's potentially autistic genius, but all of them are still middle and upper class white men. All the memory skills in the world wasn't going to save an autistic kid who was born a peasant or a slave. And if you think that you're so special with your big old brain and your unique ability to think thoughts, then you should know that with great power comes great responsibility. So what are you doing with it, genius? Are you on TikTok bragging? Disparaging others for not thinking as good as you, for being big old dotsies who can't even use their brains right? Or are you using your big brain skills for the betterment of your community, to provide security and abundance for those currently without? Or are you on the internet writing origin myths and world building the fiction where autistic people are magical godlike aliens or whatever sent from the stars.
Asperger's is a unique set of traits which is very likely to be the driver behind some of the greatest human achievements to date. We need to take ownership of our future. We need to understand that we are possibly one of the best things that happened to human development.
That quote kind of reminds me of another quote I heard somewhere.
All the human culture, all the results of art, science, and technology that we see before us today are almost exclusively the creative product of the Aryan. He is the Prometheus of mankind, from whose bright forehead the divine spark of genius has sprung at all times. If he dies out or declines, the dark veils of an age without culture will again descend on this globe.
I bet you're wondering what this is here. Why I chose to film this here, next to this busy road. I'm in Berlin, at the Memorial for the Victims of the Nazis' Child Euthanasia Program. This is, quite literally, where our story ends. Sterilization for the Nazis wasn't enough. They would be the ones to take negative eugenics to its next logical step. In 1939, the parents of a newborn disabled child applied for what they called a mercy killing. Up until then, religious views on the sanctity of life had stopped eugenicists short of actually ending the lives of disabled people, and such a thing was illegal in Germany. But the parents, who were staunch Nazis, petitioned Hitler himself, who ordered a doctor to go and decide whether the infant was indeed disabled enough to die. He was. And when the Nazis saw that there was no pushback to the murder of this baby, they took it as a green light to roll out a program which had been years in the making. The Child Euthanasia Program was a precursor to the mass murder of Germany's disabled population. At first, parents of disabled children were told that their kids were being taken into the care of specialist hospitals, only to either be immediately killed or first used for scientific research. In August 1939, the Interior Ministry stated that those subject to execution included children with Down syndrome, any kind of difference in formation of spine, limbs, or head, seizure conditions, paralysis, and idiocy. The mass murder of disabled people in Nazi Germany came in stages. Shortly after the first children had been sent to die, they expanded the program to include adults, before also including elderly and infirm people. It was becoming difficult for the regime to keep up the pace of murdering people, even with the full and often enthusiastic cooperation of most family doctors, who were in charge of referring people for what they would call treatment. 5,000 children, including hundreds of newborn babies, had been murdered by the 40s, and it is they who are remembered here. But the worst was unbelievably yet to come. By the end of 1939, the Nazis sought a more effective way to cleanse the race of useless eaters. In January 1940, Victor Brack headed an operation at the Brandenburg Euthanasia Center, which experimented with the use of bottled carbon monoxide gas for the use of efficient mass murder. It worked, and the murder of disabled people via gas chamber became the standard across Germany. Up to 300,000 disabled Germans were murdered this way between 1940 and 1945 as part of what would later be known as Action T4. The technology designed for the elimination of Germany's disabled and elderly population was later put to use in the death camps across Europe. The SS officers who were in charge of the euthanasia program went on to run these death camps, which saw the extermination of millions. From the Holocaust Encyclopedia, the T4 program became the model for the mass murder of Jews, Roma, and others in camps equipped with gas chambers that the Nazis would open in 1941 and 1942. The program also served as a training ground for the SS members who manned these camps. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of positive eugenics. The idea that gifted, intelligent, wealthy, and successful people should have as many babies as possible for the betterment of humanity. But the other side of that coin is and will always be negative eugenics. If you think certain people are more worthy of passing on their genes than others, then it is a short step away from thinking that those others should not.
The conclusion of all eugenicist thought is this. The conclusion of all hierarchical thought is this, that some kinds of people are simply more deserving of life than others. Upholding hierarchical supremacist eugenicist ideals, even if you dress it up in New Age tie-dye, even if you dress it up as advocacy, it all leads to the same place. Here. You might think that all this was a long time ago, back when everything was in black and white, but we don't think those things anymore. We've changed. We've evolved. 1945 was 80 years ago. There are elderly people alive in Germany today who might have lost siblings to this program. And there are no doubt countless people who lost cousins, aunts, uncles, and neighbours. 80 years is less than an average lifetime. People alive today remember the rounding up and disappearance of disabled people from their communities.
And in case that's not enough to bring all of this crashing home, in May of this year, 2024, in Mönchengladbach here in Germany, a residential home for disabled people was attacked. A brick was thrown at a window, and attached to the brick was the message, euthanasia is the solution.
The far right is growing in support and power all over Europe, and especially here in Germany. These aren't yesterday's problems, yesterday's ideas. These are our problems. And we don't fight fascism by being unwitting circulators of their propaganda. So stop it. By the way, if you are ever in Berlin, you should check out this memorial. It's unfortunately kind of a bit out of the way, and as such, it's incredibly quiet. It's located on the site of the original headquarters of the Action T4 program, which is very fitting. However, it does mean that it misses most of the big tour groups. It's situated right next to the Philharmonic Orchestra house, somewhat close to Potsdamer Platz, and right next to Tiergarten, which is behind me. I highly recommend it if you're visiting the city. But you will cry. Some people like crying on vacation, I don't know.
Ashkot un orhietk iskatarniat ohrietk an urhietk iskatarniat ohrietk an urhietk ohrietk iskanashkut un iskatarian hanirorietk an urhietk iskatarin ohrietk anot ohrietk onietk ash. Crown opening to let in the lights, and we're dropping right down into the heart space. Uskonias kataniot oinat ink orhiet inskot un orhiet an urink ahriet ink orhiet ink ahriet on ut iskatniat iskanonoskatniat katanian noriet an ut oriet an orhiet an at orhiet